Welcome to Careers in Discovery, where you'll meet scientists who've forged outstanding careers in biotech and hear about what they've learned along the way. This podcast is brought to you by Singular, building brilliant biotechs. Nuno Madeira is the CEO of Reflection Therapeutics, a biotech company harnessing the potential of Tregs to treat inflammatory diseases. Nuno shared the story of his career so far, and among other things, we discussed pivoting a biotech into a new disease area, transitioning from research into commercial roles, and how a children's cartoon inspired a career in life sciences. I'm delighted this week to be joined by Nuno Madeira of Reflection Therapeutics. Nuno, welcome to Careers in Discovery.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic to see you. So Nuno, you may know we always start by talking a bit about what you're doing now. And Reflection Therapeutics is a company that you've recently taken on the role of CEO at. Tell us a bit about your work, tell us a bit about what you're up to and why you got involved.
Sure. So Reflection was founded in 2018 by Tim Newton when he was studying at Cambridge. He had an idea to use Tregs for the treatment of neuroinflammation. Mm-hmm. So he met a lady called Olaf Vodlek and they applied for some money. They won a few grants and they took Reflection for 3-4 years. Last year, Tim has decided that he wanted to pursue his career elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So I was invited by Tim and by the board to join as the new CEO. The idea being that I would bring a new management team with me, and we would take Reflection forward to basically take it all the way to clinical trials. So that's what I've been doing for the past 4 months now, though it feels a lot longer than that. I'm sure. And it's been very, very interesting so far.
Yeah, fantastic. And so tell us a bit about then. Because I understand you sort of nuancing the direction a little bit and there's some changes within the company. As you said, the management team's changing, all that kind of thing. So tell us a bit about how you're going to use this platform then going forward and what the plan is now.
Right, exactly. So in the past, we'd only focused on neuroinflammation. That was Tim's area of expertise. But when I took over, I thought we were short selling ourselves because our technology can be applicable to other areas of inflammation rather than just neurologic system. So the way that we are running ourselves is an inflammation company. So we're addressing all sorts of inflammation. Obviously, because of our history, we'll have one asset in neuroinflammation, but we're also open to other indications outside the neurologic system. Yes. And with that in mind, I hired a CSO and co-founder. His name is Nia Mami, an expert in inflammation, in immunology, and also a lot of experience in Tregs. And he's been taking assets all the way from discovery to IND approval. So he's been a great person to have on board, and we're doing good things together.
No, it's fantastic. And so the particular approach that you're taking with Tregs, what do you think about sort of the advantages that has over some other inflammation therapies that are being developed? Why this approach to this problem?
I think that the best way is to imagine like an iceberg. So if you think that the current standard of care only addresses the tip of the iceberg, but only the one disease factor, Tregs can address the whole thing. So what's on the surface, which is inflammation, but also go to the root causes of that inflammation. So Tregs, for example, they have the ability to repair tissue, to rejuvenate tissue, to regulate the immune system. So if you think about autoimmune diseases and inflammation in general, this is a very important ability to have. Apart from that, I think some people have tried Tregs in the past as anti-inflammatory treatments. The difference that we have as Reflection is that we engineer Tregs to fight the most common issues when you look at them from a therapeutic point of view.
Right.
So Tregs are associated to have, for example, a very broad antigen specificity, so they can have off-site effects. They have high plasticity, so they can turn into other types of cells. And they have very low in vivo persistence, meaning that they don't stay at the site of inflammation for long periods of time. We've addressed those issues separately. So we've conjugated our Tregs with a CAR, a chimeric antigen receptor, and a tissue tether. So they go only for inflamed tissue and our tissue of choice. We built in a phenotypic lock to make sure that they are Tregs for the whole process, and also a persistence module to make sure that they stay at the site of inflammation for longer periods of time. So by doing that, we're fully and taking the whole potential of Tregs and using them for therapeutic purposes better than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I see. Okay. And as you say, this can then be applied
To what
broadly
other
across
indications?
inflammatory. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay. Interesting. And a lot of the people we've had on the show who've been in chief executive roles have either been the original founder of the company or have been with the company for some time. So I'm interested in kind of how you've approached the first, coming into a company for the first 4 months. Where do
Yeah.
you start coming in as an incoming CEO? What's been your sort of approach to taking on that role?
I think I went through all the stages of excitement,
Yeah.
stress, fear, panic. It was very interesting at the beginning.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was to basically look at where we were in terms of our monthly spend, our operations, and our science and our funding, and basically try to cut down all unnecessary costs, try
Yeah.
to streamline operations, so make sure that we have a lean company going forward, and then find the co-founder was essential for us. So look out there and see who else can we get on board that is a Tregs expert, that experience in driving products to the clinic. And then we find Nia. And now together we're looking at the science. What kind of pieces of data do we need to progress the company forward? And how can we better position ourselves to raise investment? And at the moment, that's our main focus is to raise investment, raise our seed rounds, to make sure that we have a company that can be active for the next few years and take an assets all the way to clinical development.
Yeah, I see. I see. So it's kind of initially come in, take stock, see what's there, what do you have, what
Exactly.
things can you make more effective, what things can you tweak, and then okay, so how can we take this and make it more effective, more attractive to investors, more impactful in terms of treating disease and developing therapies.
Exactly. And it's also give it our own voice. Because
Yeah,
obviously, as
yeah.
a previous management team, they had a way to present things, they had a way to approach a problem. A new management team that is pitching a company has different ways of looking at things, different ways to present, different ways to position the company. So we went through a lot of work on that, a lot of rebranding, changing slide decks, things like that. And
Yes.
I think now we have our own voice that reflects our new management team, and we are in a better position now to move the company forward.
Yeah, excellent. And we will talk as we go on a little bit about what happens next and your plans for the business. But I mostly wanted to spend today talking about you, Nuno, and your journey to this point, really.
Yeah.
And we were talking just off air before we started recording about the origins of your scientific career, and it's an interesting scenario you found yourself in. So tell us a bit about that. Why? Because you're a pharmacist by training.
Yeah.
Tell us why science, why this career, why drugs, why this type of route for you.
So I think it's a bit interesting because no one in my family has a degree in life sciences, and both my brother and I did the same degree, both in pharmacy.
Right.
So I think I can point you to two things. When we were kids, we watched this show called MacGyver. I don't know if you're
Okay, yeah.
familiar with it,
Yeah.
which is now this guy that does science and experiments and all got these weird situations in the room with a paperclip and chewing gum. So that was like, wow, science experiments. And the other thing that was really important for me, I think, was there's a cartoon called Once Upon a Time in Life.
Okay.
Where they look at the human body from a cartoon point of view. So, for example, the red cells, they take a backpack with oxygen and they're going to deliver the oxygen, and the immune cells are the police, and the viruses and bacteria are like thieves and thugs. So it was shown in a very cartoony kind of way.
Okay.
And I watched that religiously with my brother.
Yeah.
And we even bought like the weekly, it's like a liver will come in one day, you put in the skeleton. Oh, here's my liver now. Now it's my lungs.
Yes.
So you build the skeleton, and that I really liked that as a kid. So when it came to the time to choose a degree, it could just make sense to go to life sciences. I've always liked the human body in general. My transition to science was a bit different. So I studied pharmacy, but I realized kind of quickly I didn't like pharmacy much.
Okay.
It was a bit boring. So I thought that, well, if I carry on studying, I'll be doing science instead of pharmacy. So I did a master's, I did a PhD on top of it at University of Nottingham. And I liked science, very interesting. But at the same time, I've always liked business. And halfway through my PhD, I opened a wine company with my brother. So very different. But we realized that Portugal had excellent wines.
Yes.
we're not drinking very good wines in the UK because we're poor students on top of everything. So I just thought, let's just start importing Portuguese wine.
Yes.
So I started that. In the meantime, I won an award by the University of Nottingham, the entrepreneurial grant. So I really started to look at science from a business point of view. I worked at MedImmune, AstraZeneca, as a scientist. Germany to work in a biotech as well as a scientist. But when I came back to the UK, I basically realized that business development was something I really like to do. Basically explain the science from a business point of view and try to work with customers and clients to make sure that their science would progress and how I could help them with that. So that took me all the way to the cell and gene therapy catapult and to the world of cell and gene therapy. And I learned a lot there. And that was really the big business impact in my life from a cell and gene therapy point of view. I was there for 4 years, learned a lot. And then I was invited to be the chief operating officer of a company called Quest Meat. So working cultivated meat, so a bit of a deviation from healthcare. But I thought that the industry had huge potential. The company had very good technology. So I thought, this is going to be a future of food in a way. So I wanted to be involved in that. And then last year I was invited to be the CEO of Reflection, and here we are.
Yes, absolutely. So from an early age, it sounds like the experience you had with this cartoon and with MacGyver, I guess, sort of showed you. But I suppose it sort of showed you perhaps the practical application of science, or it made it more real, because I think it can be quite abstract particularly for kids, right? It can be quite abstract concepts to deal with.
No, exactly. I agree with that, because I never liked research for the sake of research. I never liked the whole blue sky research. I was like things with a practical application. So if I'm doing an experiment, it's because I want to make this into a reality or into a product or something to help people. That was always the end goal. So I think that, as you mentioned, MacGyver and those cartoons always had that angle. And that's something that I really liked, was to have that applicability of the research to something real.
Yeah. And have you developed the MacGyver skills? If we locked you in a barn with nothing there, would you be able to come up with a tank?
I wish. That is still one of my childhood dreams. I wish I could do it.
Fair enough. Always seem to have exactly what you needed in those surrounding areers.
Always the right components at the right time to get out of the right situation. It was amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, several things that I want to sort of explore from what you've just told us about there. So, so you were down in the Algarve at university, and you came and did your PhD in Nottingham. Obviously, again, we talked a little bit before recording about the differences in the surroundings that you found yourself in.
And in cuisine as well.
Yeah. Did you find much difference scientifically? Was it quite an easy transition for you in terms of the work you were doing, or how was that?
It was a huge transition. I think it really showed me the difference between Portugal and the UK when it comes to higher education. One thing that really surprised me, that I wasn't really aware, was how involved the industry is with universities in the UK. By sponsoring the research, by placing students there. So in Portugal, that's much more limited. There's fewer companies that are interested in investing in that, or they have the resources to do that. So that was the first shock, was when I went to Nottingham. They told me, first day of PhD cohort, they said, this year we attracted over £20 million of investment. And I was like, wow, that sounds like a lot of money from the industry for PhD students. So that was the first shock. And then the fact that Nottingham is quite a big school of pharmacy.
Yes.
It's got several research buildings, plus the undergrads and the master students. It was such a shock of going from a small university in a small country to a big university, Russell Group, full of people, and a huge, beautiful campus. It was a shock, but a good shock. It definitely prepared me for my career to step up my game and to look at things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that while you were there, you stumbled on you created this idea with your brother for this wine business, the importing. And yes, perhaps there was a slightly selfish angle in that to start with.
A little bit, yeah.
But there was an opportunity there, and I remember from this is aging me now, but when I was at school, we did a wine course. One of the teachers was really passionate about wine. So if you turned 18 by the time you got into upper sixth form, you could take this course as like a course. And he was always talking about Portuguese wine. And Portuguese wine is an alternative to Spanish and French wine because that's so expensive. But very different to what you'd been training to do. And of course, I don't know, how did you educate yourself about business? How did you develop those skills? Tell us a bit about sort of the development of that streak in you.
I think you make a lot of mistakes and you learn from those mistakes. I think that's basically what happened. So I've always liked that idea of having my own company, of doing my own thing. The wine was, a good excuse to do that. But I've always wanted to do that. I think I read quite a lot of business books to give me some of the concepts, but I also talked to a lot of people. I think that there's a lot of value in talking to the right people that you can learn a lot from that does not come in the books. So even during my undergrad, I spent a lot of time outside the lecture halls talking to people and being involved in the students' union and things like that. So I could do things other than just attending classes and labs and get my degree. And I think that networking aspect of things in Nottingham was huge as well. So it was basically that: reading books, making mistakes, and then not making the same mistake twice. So you make one mistake, that's fine, but learn from it, and then don't repeat the same thing afterwards.
And I'm sure a few of them stick in the memory, but any particularly formative
I think one of the things that I learned is that if you're starting a business with friends, you have to be prepared to sometimes not be friends and just focus on the business. And if they're really good friends, you have to be able to then overcome that business aspect and just be friends again afterwards. So it's more like, not be careful with who you do business with, more like it's okay to do business with friends, but be prepared to have the other side of the coin when it comes to it.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? There's always not baggage is a negative word, but there's context there, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. There's, if you're friends for 20 years and you've known each other since you were children, if you're going to make business, you have to sometimes say, listen, this is not good, or you have to do this better, or I made a mistake, sorry about that. But at the end of the day, we're still friends. So there's that aspect of things that I learned a lot about that when I opened my companies.
Yes. And as you said, that kind of gave you exposure to some of the things that you were more interested in. So what, I guess, first of all, what was it about the business side of the industry that particularly appealed to you?
I think it had a huge potential for me to learn new things that were not book things. So the science, you can read papers, you can attend classes, it's there. But the business, I think, is more of a soft skill sometimes. It's about personal relationships, about how to talk to people. And I've always liked to understand what people think and how they think and what motivates them. So by having that business side of things, I think it really allowed you to explore that side of things. And also, when I started working and I realized what I had to do with my career, which was to eventually get to CEO of a biotech company, I thought that business would give me a lot of skills that I didn't have as a scientist. That if I had the science knowledge and add that extra layer of knowledge on the business side of things, it would put me in a very good position to eventually become management in a biotech. And it paid off, fortunately.
Yes, absolutely. Congratulations.
Thank you.
No, but I think the point you make is a really important one. I think we see a lot of university spin-outs, for example, and people starting biotech companies who don't have a lot of business experience, and that's not necessarily an issue. I think sometimes the sort of the default option is given to go and do an MBA or to do a short MBA course or whatever. But what you've said there is really important, is that actually you can have all the models in the world and all the case studies in the world, but it's about the person sat in front of you, right? Or the person sat across the room from you that actually is where the business takes place.
A lot of the time it comes down to, I don't like that person, or I like that person. And then you get to develop a relationship with that person professionally and work together. And that's very hard to study.
Yes.
That's very hard to read the book and say, oh yeah, now I know how to do this. I think you have to go trial and error, and the experience there is valuable.
Absolutely. And I think, appreciation that it's kind of different from science, right? In that, if you have the evidence in science,
Yeah,
then for that moment in time, until someone proves otherwise, then you're correct, right?
yeah, exactly.
Whereas there can be 10 people sat around a table and 12 different opinions.
Exactly. And things will change with time.
Yeah.
So problem of company A might have a problem, company B has a different problem, and those problems will evolve with time.
Yes.
And also it makes you learn and be always up to date with the science and the answers for those questions. I always like that side of business development and business in science.
Yeah. And I think, maybe scientists will know this for part of this, but I think the part that a lot of people miss outside of science and outside of business is actually they're both very creative professions. You're building something, you're having to come up with creative insights as a scientist. As a business person, you're creating something where there may not be something there already. And
exactly. I agree. That's also it's thinking outside the box a little bit in both areas. Because if you're looking at business, how can I make things better? How can I make things more efficient in my company? And sometimes I come up with new solutions. And same thing with science, as you just said. So yeah, definitely there's an overlap between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about the cell and gene therapy catapult and that being a place that was really key for you in terms of your development. So I guess first of all, for people who may not be aware, can you tell us a little bit about the catapults and the cell and gene therapy catapult in particular, and then tell us a bit about what you did there and why that was so important for you?
Yeah, sure. So the catapult system was created about 12 years ago now, where the government identified at the time 10 different areas that the rationale was if we invest in this area now, this industry will grow, and then we'll get jobs in this area, qualified people in this area, more exports for the country, and basically creating a lot of companies and businesses in the UK. So there were, as I said, 10. The one that I worked for was the cell and gene therapy catapult. So this was 2010, I think,
right?
When there was maybe 2 companies in the UK doing cell and gene therapy. So there was nothing.
Yes.
And the cell and gene therapy catapult did the effort of preparing the regulatory systems, the payers, the NHS, creating the right conditions for companies to succeed. And the way that they do that is they try to predict what the problems will be, what the bottlenecks will be for companies, and try to address those issues before they become an issue.
Yeah, interesting.
So when the company gets to that stage of development, the answer is already there.
Yes.
So it's a not-for-profit organization, does not control companies, does not invest in companies, but it creates the solutions that then companies can use to develop their own products and to get to patients and eventually to the market.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important institution. And I think that one of the reasons why, going back to Portugal versus UK, that the UK is so good at creating businesses has to do with a lot of this entrepreneurial spirit and the catapult network. Because the catapult where I used to work, there was no blue sky research. All the research had to have an economic and business angle to things.
Yeah, okay.
So you create a company, or you do have an idea. How can I make this into a product, into a company?
Yes.
That was always the goal, which is very, very important.
Yes.
So for me, it was that part. I'll always have a practical objective in mind. And also, when I joined the cell and gene therapy catapult, I didn't know anything about cell and gene therapy.
Right. Okay.
I actually opened my job interview with that. I don't know anything about cell and gene therapy. And they said, fine, we'll teach you. So I was lucky enough to have a lot of very smart people working there that had the time and the patience to explain things. And another thing that we are exposed to hundreds of companies. If you work for the cell and gene therapy catapult, companies in the UK, companies in Europe, companies in the US, in Asia. So you learn a lot from those companies, and you see different problems from different angles. And if you think about, for example, the US, it's always a bit ahead than the other countries. So you see things a bit more advanced than they are in the UK, for example. So you can learn from there and then bring that knowledge home. That was very, very important. And then just a way of doing business, really smart people involved in the Cell and Gene Therapy catapult, and that they were very open and available to conversations. Even CEO, CBO, everybody that that was an employee of the Catapult was open for you to say, hey, can I have a chat? And they would say, yeah, sure. How can I help you?
Yeah.
It was that was excellent, and having that kind of openness, I think it's fantastic.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, you've touched on it there. The having an organization like that, and I know there are other catapults as you mentioned, that the purpose of the organization is to create that platform, to share that information, to not in a proprietary way, obviously, but to tackle some of the common challenges that companies doing this type of research will face. Having that body there just enables much easier solutions, right? Because I think if you were a company trying to achieve that, a service company even, or what have you, then the vested interest means that you can't quite be as open, you can't quite be as helpful as you would like to be, right?
Yes, and you'd focus only on the one thing,
right?
If you had a company that does, let's say, only gene therapy, you only focus on the gene therapy problems.
Yes.
So the Catapult is technology agnostic and company agnostic. So it doesn't matter. As long as it helps the industry, they will do it. And I think that is essential as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your role was primarily in business development, as you mentioned there, in kind of different capacities, the different focuses as you went through your time there. And clearly you had some experience with sales and marketing and these sorts of activities from your entrepreneurial activities.
Yes.
It's a different role, I suppose. So am I right in thinking that you were going and talking to companies about coming and working with the Catapult and trying to find problems that you could help to solve and doing all that kind of thing?
Yeah, that was one part of it. The other part was try to establish collaborations and partnerships. So one of the things that I did that took a lot of time was to try to work with Canada, for example.
Right.
So having the UK and Canada working together because they have a similar health system. And the idea was, how can Canadian companies work with British companies, and how can we make this partnership work? So that was one thing that eventually ended up in a grant call that now both countries can apply to. Also with other countries, Brazil, for example, was another one that wanted to develop a Catapult program. How can we help them doing that in Brazil?
Yeah.
And how can we help those academics and early stage startups to come to the UK, work in the UK, but at the same time teach them how to do things themselves?
Yes.
It was very, very interesting, that aspect of things.
Yeah, you must have met some fascinating people.
I did. I think I met 2 different ministers of science for Brazil.
Wow.
I met a lot of consuls, vice consuls, and I think you're exposed to such an amazing network of people when you are at the Catapult, especially because, as you said, I was in charge of US, North America, South America eventually. So you are exposed to everybody who comes from that side of the world to talk to you about things. And yeah, fascinating discussions and conversations and a lot of interesting people along the way.
Yes. And there are, clearly it was a scientific business development role. So your scientific background, even though it wasn't in cell and gene therapy, gave you some grounding to understand what these people were doing and to be able to advise in an informed way. But I suppose, as you've touched on, being a business development professional is quite different in its outlook and its day-to-day than being a researcher. If people are, I'm thinking about people who might be listening to this who are thinking about making that transition, who are interested in the commercial side of the industry, who are interested in getting into that business development side. What were the things that you found really important in your transition, and what were the key things that you learned, do you think?
So my first role in business development was at a company called Pion. I was hired to be the head of biopharmaceutical development, which meant that I was doing the scientific development in the lab, also sales support, and basically the whole thing bio was coming to my desk.
Right.
After a few months there, I was doing sales support. So basically the business development person, my manager at the time, would go and explain the company. I would then explain the instrument I was working with, talk the science with the client, and then my manager would come and wrap things up with a business development fashion. So after a while, I told him, listen, I think I can do this. So he told me, okay, let's try it. So we tried, and I had some success, and I carried on. And I think a couple of things there is, if you want to change areas, say so.
Right.
Don't be afraid of saying, I think I want to do this instead. And if you have a good manager, they'll understand that it's not because you don't like a job or you just fed up with things. It's because you want to try something new, and there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people ask me that transition between the science and the business. I think it's you have to make some compromises. So you might be a senior scientist in a company doing lab work. You're not going to be a senior business development manager in
Right.
a new job. So you're going to have to do either the sidestep or even go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Probably get paid less money.
Sure.
Go for a more junior position. But if that's really what you want to do, just have to do it. But sometimes even inside your own company, as I said, if you have the right people in charge, they'll be open for you to make that transition internally and to develop a new career. And it worked for me, and I've seen it work for other people as well. So I think it's a good option as well.
Yeah, and I suppose if you do that internal transition, you start from a position where you know a lot about what the company
Exactly.
does, right? And
Exactly. You know the business, you know the science that you're doing, just a different way of going about doing things.
yeah,
But yeah, I think having the courage of saying, I want to try something new. If you have the right manager for it, then that's it. You sorted.
yeah. And I think apologies, this may be a challenging question that I haven't prepared you for. But I think sometimes what holds people back from making those transitions in their careers is they worry, are they going to be any good at it? Are they going to be able to do that job? So
Yeah.
as someone who's done that, do you have any thoughts on what makes someone a good business development person and what that requires?
I think having the soft skills to do it is quite important
Yeah.
because, as I said before, having that business development comes down to a lot of soft skills, how to talk to somebody, how to be open and friendly. But it's also the way that I approached this was always I work for my client's company.
Right.
So the way that I approached things was my client's company has an issue. I'm part of that company now. How can I solve this issue now? Let's work together. And then eventually, how can my services help you solve that issue? But I always put myself in the other person's shoes. I think that's very important to do because if you're just doing sales,
Yeah.
you're not going to do it because people know that you're just there for a number, for whatever commission or bonus you're getting. But if you put yourself in the other person's shoes, if you work together as a team, then things really happen a lot better than they otherwise would.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting. I think my background was in sales. I started as a salesperson and sort of that was how I was trained. And I think especially when you're young, you're focused on your own targets and the things that you need to do, right? And your own commission and those things.
Yeah.
Because you haven't got any money and you need to
Exactly. I fully understand that.
Yeah. But I think, interestingly, and it's hard to do, but if you can make that transition to really focusing on how you can help people, the interesting thing is they start falling all over themselves to give you money.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that money comes as a consequence of you being able to work together.
Yeah.
And I think if we can do it that way, it's much easier. There's a lot less stress, less pressure. And it makes it much more interesting because you have to learn a lot more about the other person's company.
Yeah.
You develop yourself as a scientist as well, as a business developer, and as a person in the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're right. It certainly does engage you more because A, you've got to find the people who you can help rather than just trying to put something in front of everybody. And B, you almost take the responsibility then to think of a way that you can help them that they haven't already thought of.
Exactly. I think it's amazing for personal growth. You learn a lot and develop a lot if you do things that way.
Yeah, it's a difficult job. That's probably worth highlighting to people.
Yeah, true.
Builds a lot of character, I think.
No, exactly. You have to take the no's as if they don't hurt you. If you take a no personally, you're gonna have a mental breakdown very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
No's are guaranteed. If you get a yes, that's a bonus. But you have to go with in mind that no is always there.
That's it. That's right. And then just briefly, and then we'll come back to reflection. You talked about your transition into the kind of agri-tech or the food tech industry. And this is an interesting one. So we did a bit of work in this a year or so ago. And it wasn't an industry I was super aware of. Obviously, it's kind of adjacent to biotech as we're talking about because they use a lot of the same skills and technologies and things like that. And I wasn't aware of how complex and impactful the problem that these companies, and I'm using this in a very broad sense, right, they're trying to solve is this balance between growing population, food supplies, emissions, all
Yeah.
the problems that sort of face the food production industry. But tell us a bit about your time there, and tell us a bit about what was different working there and all of that.
So I think it was a bit of, I would say, unexpected transition to cultivated meat, because I work in healthcare my whole life. And then people ask me, why are you moving to cultivated meat? And I genuinely think it will change the way that we live lives. And I think it will change the way that we perceive food and science.
Yes.
So some studies say that about 35% of all meat consumed by 2040 will come from a lab. That's huge. Those are huge numbers.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, all we call processed meat, so burgers, sausages, pies, you don't need to have a prime cut of beef to do that.
No.
So if you can do it with the same taste, a same safety, and the same flavor, and cut down the emissions, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I was really excited. I still am excited by the industry, and I don't think people understand that it's not just meat. It can be fish, can be seafood, can be dog food, can be leather, can be all the animal components that you see. They can probably be made in a lab, or will be made in the labs in the future. And there's another angle to that is even thinking even further ahead, which is space. There's already a lot of investment by the European Space Agency about how to make meat in space, because if you colonize another planet, you cannot really take the cows with you.
No.
But you can do it in the lab. So if you can produce the protein in the lab for the European Space Station, in a new planet, then you solve the problem of how am I going to feed
how do you
people
get the food there? Yeah.
there. So I think it's super interesting. I think it's something that we now just seeing the beginning of it.
Yes.
I think that in 5-10 years time, it will become common, almost mainstream, to go to see cultivated food in a supermarket, in restaurants. And I think that 20-30 years from now, we won't know anything different. There'll always be traditional meat.
Yeah.
But that will be just a percentage of the whole market.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's as you say, it's more challenging. It's more about forming people's beliefs at the moment than capability, isn't it? Because the technology is there.
Yeah, and it's safe, and people, it's the same thing. I'm sure that, people remember when first microwaves came out and say, microwaves give you cancer, and now you don't even think about putting something in the microwave, right? And at the moment, people are saying, Franken meat and all those cultivated meats. People think about the Matrix and that gooey paste they were eating and stuff like that. I think that once they realize, and I've seen cultivated meat fried, and it smells the exact same thing as normal meats, and I've seen products made with it, people will not know the difference.
No.
And people have done blind tastings in very small proof of concept pieces, and people say it's the same. It's the exact same thing. And I think it's be very interesting for us the next 5-10 years to go to restaurants that only serve this.
Yes.
And people will love it, and will be as healthy as the current meat, and a lot less harmful for the planet.
No, absolutely. And, a lot of people who build careers in the drug discovery and drug development sector, they stay within that for their entire career. And there's reasons for that. It's a very specialized area. Do you feel you've taken anything from a different industry that you've brought back with you?
I think for me, it was the fact that it was my first C-suite role. So yes. I was hired as Chief Operating Officer. So it gave me a lot of learnings in terms of how to set up a business from scratch, how to build a team, how to build the processes, how to go about funding and people, and basically starting a whole new company in what it is still biotech and still cell sciences. As you said before, it's the same procedures, same bioreactors, same everything. So I learned a lot about that, how to set up a business, how to talk to investors about raising money. And those teachings, I use them every day now at Reflection. I think it's very, very useful. And, you're exposed to different early stage startups and learn a lot from those. It's hard work, but you learn a lot. And then in the end, everything will pay off eventually at some point, hopefully.
No, absolutely. That's the plan. And we'll come to that in just a minute. But before we do, so Nuno, if you looking back on your career, if you were talking to yourself back at the time that either you sort of finished your PhD, or you made the transition into the commercial side of the business, or a young scientist starting out in the industry, you may have mentioned some of these things already, but what are the one or two things, do you think, that you've learned over the years that you would pass on to that person, that you would give as advice?
So there was something that the head of pharmacy, when I was an undergrad student, told me at some point. She told me, do you want to be a pair of hands, or do you want to be a pair of hands with a brain? And that really stayed with me, because she said to me, everybody can be a pair of hands. Everybody can follow protocol. Everybody can just do something that they're told. But if you want to be something else, you have to be something else. You have to think differently. So that really stayed with me. So that's an advice, is that I'll give somebody, is like, don't be just a pair of hands. Be a pair of hands with a brain attached. And then during my career, I learned a lot about how not to be a manager, as much as I learned how to be a manager. And I think that it's quite important that you trust people, that you hire the right people, and that you trust them to do their jobs, because you spend time and effort hiring somebody that you think is good for the job. So why are you spending time micromanaging that person? Just trust them that they'll do a good job, and they will.
Yeah.
And I believe that if you trust somebody, that trust then gets back to you, and everybody has a better relationship and can do better and bigger things than if you just constantly controlling that person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it changes everything when you start to realize that most people, there are exceptions obviously, but the vast majority of people really just want to do a good job and do well.
Yeah. And the thing is, if you try to do everything, you'll go crazy.
Yeah.
You don't have time and mental space to do everything in a business. So delegate, trust people that they'll do a good job, and then just come back at the end of it and discuss the results. Because otherwise you won't have space to do your job that only you can do. You'll be worrying about the small things that a lot of other people can do, and nobody wins with that situation.
No, absolutely. So to finish us off, Nuno, you talked a lot about the hard work you've been putting in at Reflection, and the work you've been doing to chart the course of the future. Tell us a bit about what's next. Tell us a bit about, the next year or so.
So next year, we hopefully going to raise our seed round, and that will give us enough money to operate for about 40 years. And the idea is that we'll have two main programs, one in the neurologic system, probably ALS, where we're going to take all the asset all the way to IND approval, CTA approval, and to clinical trials. And then a second indication outside the neurologic system, where we're going to try to explore our technology outside that system and see what we can do. We believe we can be successful with that.
Yes.
So for us, the next year is just raising money, get operations in place. So new lab, new team, allocate costs. So when the money comes, we're ready to go, and be successful at it.
Fantastic. Well, it's a big year. We wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you very much. I think it will be very intense, but very interesting and very rewarding as well.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for listening. Careers in Discovery is sponsored by Singular, helping you to build a brilliant biotech company. Biotech leaders spend far too much time, money, and energy on hiring and people issues. Head to www.singular-biotech.com to learn how you can recruit and engage your team more effectively, so you can focus on developing medicines, treating patients, and saving lives.